If you go by the traditional Sunday school version of history, the world's major religions arrived perfectly packaged. The scriptures, the laws, the rituals, they all dropped out of the sky, fully formed, and were handed to an isolated group of chosen people. But the archaeological and linguistic records tell a completely different story. These traditions grew slowly over centuries. They borrowed heavily from their neighbors, and in many cases they were categorized and named long after they began, often by outsiders. Take the early Israelites. The oldest layers of the Hebrew Bible and physical artifacts show that early Israelite religion was polytheistic. Excavators continue to find household idols in Israelite settlements, and ancient inscriptions even refer to the national god Yahweh paired with a goddess consort, Asherah. Or consider the Indian subcontinent. The religious practices there are ancient, but the unified concept of Hinduism as a single named religion is a modern creation. It crystallized in the 19th century when British colonial bureaucrats, interacting with Indian elites, needed a label to box in these diverse, independent traditions. The history of the great religious traditions of the West and South Asia is dominated by two deep family trees, a Semitic root and an Indo-Iranian one. The first deep root anchors the Indo-Iranian tree. Sometime in the Bronze Age, on the Central Asian steppe, a single ancestral group practiced a shared religion involving sacred drinks and fire rituals. We can prove this shared origin through linguistics. Ancient texts reveal that the Sanskrit of Vedic India and the Avestan language of ancient Iran share a nearly identical vocabulary. The Sanskrit word for seven, sapta, is the Avestan hapta, and they share names for sacred rituals. But these groups split, creating a massive philosophical schism. The break caused a linguistic inversion. The ancient Sanskrit word for God, deva, literally became the Iranian word for demon, deva. The population that moved into India developed a pantheon of gods and eventually the introspective philosophy of the Upanishads. Meanwhile, in Iran, a priest named Zarathustra formalized the schism into a strict cosmic battle between a supreme wise lord and a hostile evil spirit. These swapped words are linguistic fossils. They preserve the permanent historical scars of an ancient people who divided over their definitions of good and evil. Now let's look at the second deep root, the Semitic family tree. This story begins in the highlands of Canaan around 1200 BCE, where a collection of villages emerged from the surrounding West Semitic culture. The transition from a polytheistic tribe to strict monotheism was forced by catastrophe. In 586 BCE, a Neo-Babylonian empire destroyed Jerusalem and deported much of Judah's elite, cutting the exiles off completely from their temple and its sacrifices. To survive in Babylon, the exiles had to reinvent their faith. Without an altar, they rebuilt their identity around memory, strict law, and text. Scholars point to this pressure cooker as the moment when the Torah was largely assembled and the exclusive worship of one God became mandatory. This forged monotheism became immensely dominant. Centuries later, Islam emerged as a restoration of this exact Abrahamic purity, presenting itself as a return to the original religion of Abraham. We have two massive parallel religious trees, the Semitic and the Indo-Iranian. Where and when did these two separate traditions collide and trade their core ideas? The physical connector between them is the Persian Empire. When Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon, he let the Jewish exiles return home. For the next 2 centuries, the Jews of Judea lived under Persian rule, saturated in Zoroastrian ideas. This chart visualizes the precise historical window when strikingly new ideas appear in Jewish texts. Before the Persian occupation, the Satan was merely a job title for a prosecutor in God's court. After this exposure, we suddenly see elaborate hierarchies of named angels, a named Satan, a coming bodily resurrection, and a final cosmic judgment. While we can't prove a direct line of transmission, the structural parallels are undeniable. Zoroastrianism is the most influential religion most people ignore, leaving its fingerprints all over the theology of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. These global traditions are deeply entangled products of empire, survival, and shared geography. Yet tracing them back to their respective roots reveals how these two lineages generated two distinct ways of thinking about the world. The deepest difference comes down to how each tradition imagines time. The Abrahamic and Iranian faiths run on a linear clock. This chart shows how a linear worldview operates: a distinct creation, a straight progression through history, and a hard stop at a final judgment. Now contrast that with Indian traditions. They operate on a cyclical clock, defined by endless loops of physical existence. These two clocks dictate the ultimate human problem. If you live on a linear timeline heading toward a final judgment, the core problem is sin, and the solution is salvation. If you live in an endless repeating cycle, the core problem is rebirth, and the solution is to break the wheel and achieve liberation. The term religion is often too small a box to hold these beliefs. Understanding these traditions means seeing them as an ongoing, shared human evolution.